Hi, I'm Christoph, and today we're going to do a tutorial about anime lightning effects in Blender. I used my own lightning effects to make this My Hero Academia fan art, but I'm going to show you how to do it with this Suzanne. If you're just curious and you want to use these materials in your own scenes, I will link them in the description below. And without further ado, let's start making some thunder and lightning effects. Alright, let's get started. Let's delete everything in the scene and let's add a plane. We'll dive right into the shader editor. I'm going to add a new shader. And as per usual, I'm going to delete the principled and we are going to add a emission shader. To start it off, we're going to add a gradient texture. And we are going to add a mapping and a texture coordinate node. And we're going to plug the UV into the mapping node. We're going to set our gradient texture to spherical. And we're going to move the center a bit by setting the X to minus 0.5. We're going to change that later anyhow. And we're going to set the scale to the X scale to 9. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to move our texture coordinate and we are going to add a separate XYZ and a combined XYZ. And this is going to allow us to modify the vectors, and this is going to create our lightning effect. So plug these all in, and we're going to add a matte node. Let's plug our X into the add node, and then we're going to plug it back into the combine XYZ. And the first modifier we're going to add is a wave texture. So let's go to texture, wave. We're going to set it to Y, and we're going to plug it into our add. And as you can see, this is going to create these teeth distortions, and we're going to set it to triangle or saw. Let's test this. I'm going to set it to triangle. And then, of course, this effect is too radical. We want to control it. And to be able to do that, we're going to add a mix RGB node. I'm going to set it to pitch black. And this is going to control the amount of distortion. And as you can see, here you can see our wave distorting the vector in this triangulated pattern. By manipulating the scale, we can modify it. And I'm going to set the scale to 1 for now. And let's also add some distortion. Set the distortion to 10. Now we will actually mix in a second wave texture. So let's go and add a mix RGB node. We're going to copy paste our wave texture in there. I think I'm going to bring back the distortion on that one, but I'm going to up the scale a bit. And we can mix that in to make it more irregular. Remember, this is our mix control that mixes the amount of the distortion. As you can see, you can get a nice lightning pattern like this. And one thing I'm going to do right now is after the gradient texture, we can add a color ramp. You can set it to a constant, and then that way we can make it a nice clean line. As you can see, our spherical texture is not in the center right now. We can modify the location by playing around with the mapping, but we're gonna return to that later. I think for now we can just leave it as it is. And so as you can see, we have our two wave textures interacting with each other. We can add even more distortion. And to do that, we're going to add another mix RGB node, and we're going to mix in a voronoi texture. We're going to use the distance, and let's plug it into our mix node. If we set the value to 1, we're using our voronoi completely and not mixing in this wave texture. Same goes for our second mix. So let's set it to 1 on both so we can see what the voronoi does. And this, of course, voronoi creates these round shapes if you use a Euclidean, but we're going to set it to Chebyshev. This creates more sharp lines. We can set this to smooth F1 if we want. And this gives us a smoothness control that either gets you this really sharp and stylized effect, or maybe you want it a bit smoother. And then we can mix this in with our other distorters. And then you can play around with the settings to get different effects. And I would say this is a really good basis for our lightning or electricity. As you can see, you can move the spherical through the distortion, and this is nice to get like a zap or something. And I'm going to show you this later. But I think right now it would be good to add a mix shader so we can make this transparent. Let's add a transparent BSDF, and now we're going to use this black and white into our mix shader as our alpha. Let's go into our material properties, set blend mode to clip and shadow mode to none for now. As you can see, this is inverted, so we're just gonna invert our color ramp. There we go. And so this color ramp also controls how thick our lightning bolt is. And this is also controlled by the scale. So if you scale it up to 30, for instance, I have to bring it back. We can make it a lot smaller too. But I want some thick lightning bolts, so I'm just gonna Control Z back. Again, you can mix in how much of the effect of the distortion you want. Might be you need to play around with the mapping just to keep everything centered. And I really like this lightning bolt, so I think next up we can animate this with drivers. Before I do that, let's make it look like a lightning bolt. And so to do that, we're going to choose a color. Let's set it to blue. And let's go into render properties, and we're going to add bloom. If we up the emission, it should give us a nice glow. You can play around with the radius if you want to, or the intensity, but I'm just going to leave it like this for now. And let's animate this. So I'm going to keep this to the side, copy paste this, and let's first make something like electricity. To do that, I'm going to add a texture and mapping coordinate node to my distortions. So let's do that. I'm going to plug it into UV and then plug it into all of the distortions. So this allows us to animate this lightning bolt by adding drivers to the location. So as you can see, you can add some directional animation. We can just make it jitter by moving it through the Z axis, and then by the X, we can move it from side to side. So I'm going to add drivers, but to do that, we're going to add a combine XYZ. And I'm going to explain to you why we're going to use this combine XYZ later. First, we're going to add drivers by adding hashtag or hash frame divided by 10. And then we're going to make it move on the y-axis as well. So hash frame divided by 25. And I think there's a bit too much distortion going on. So I'm just going to bring it back. Play around with the settings a bit. Yeah, I like that. And now we can actually randomize this by going and using a object info, plugging in the random into the Z. And now if we use Alt D to create duplicates, we can create duplicates. But as you can see, they all look very similar, and that's because the number that's being randomized is too close to each other. So we need to multiply it with a mat node. So just add a mat node, set it to multiply, and we're going to set it to a high random number, so something like 457, 457. Let's try it out with different values. Yep, that creates a unique lightning bolt each time. Let's press play. And I like this. So let's go back to our mapping. I think I need to set this to 05. And when I play around with the color ramp, I can make it so I can see the edge of our lightning bolt. One cool thing is that we've added the UV. So that means actually we can manipulate the plane. So I'm just gonna copy paste this plane, and we can go into edit mode. We can right click and subdivide. No, let's not subdivide. Let's go to a loop cut. That's better. And set number of cuts to 8. I'm just gonna cut it in 8 pieces. Now we're gonna scale it. And now we can actually move this around and our texture will follow. And as you can see, we can create these arches. Might be you need to play around with the scale of the wave. But it should be good to go. And so let's try a more extreme setting, and let's just click on these edges. We're gonna put on proportional editing, and we can rotate this edge. And if we press page up, we can rotate the rest as well. And so we can create this spiral. And so as you can see, you can make these more extreme effects. And then you just play around with these settings until you're happy. And that's why we use the UV. Another thing you can do is we can add some more lightning style effects or zap effects by adding some strobe. And to do that, we can do this actually here, right after our mix shader. We can add a mix RGB, set it to a black value, or set it to white, a negative value, to make our lightning disappear. And now we need to control this value using a driver. And so let's go and take input value, and we're going to plug it into this mix RGB node. And let's go to our value. Let's add hash, and let's add cosine, and then frame times pi. And this will create a strobe effect. I hope nobody gets seizures from this, but you can actually make it slower by dividing it. So pi divided by 4. This is too slow. You can divide it by 2. And this works fine. But I really like the fast strobe. And this gives this crazy strobe effect. I'm going to copy paste this, and we can also use this value actually to drive sort of an up and down movement. So let's take our value, and instead of plugging it into our mix, we're going to plug it into our location. But to do that, we need to add a combine XYZ again. Let's copy paste our X, so -7, -0.5, and O, plug it into our location. And I think, yes, we need to move the Y value. So plug our value into the Y. We're going to add some values to this. So we're going to divide this by 4. And then we can add a multiply of 2 and add 1 plus. And this gives us more of this zapping effect. It goes from one side to the other. Of course, if you want a well-timed lightning strike on something, I would suggest that you just, I'm going to remove the value, that you just keyframe this value. So you just go to your timeline and say you just want a lightning strike on frame 50. You go to your Y value, you press I, and this is going to add a keyframe. Let's set it to 3 frames earlier. Just make it disappear. Set it to I. And so when it hits, we're actually going to make it disappear for a frame. Bring it back. Let's see. Let's add another keyframe. Let's make it disappear again. Press I to keyframe. Bring it back. The way we're going to bring it back is just we're going to copy paste this keyframe. Control C, Control V. Zap zap, and now we're gonna make it disappear like this. So by manipulating the Y value and adding keyframes, you can make this lightning effect. And let's play that back. I think the last keyframe can be a bit shorter. Just gonna move it. And that's that. Of course, you can make some spherical effects by just copy pasting these and just rotating them around so that they all hit the same center. You can do some crazy effects with this. I love it. And also, the same technique can be applied to 3D objects. So I have this scene where I have this Suzanne, and we're gonna apply the same effect but in 3D. Let's pause this. To do this, we actually just have an outer layer of Suzanne, and we added the shader. And it's just a variation on the shader that we had before. But instead of a spherical gradient, we're using a wave texture. So now I'm going to show you how to make this effect. So let's add a monkey. We're going to add a light, something like a sunlight, just so we can see the monkey. Let's copy paste this, and we're going to scale it up, and we're going to add one of our lightning materials. I'm going to add the one with the strobe, but I'm going to disconnect the strobe for now. And so I think I've put the wrong monkey. I've scaled the wrong monkey. So let's see our outer layer. And now we're going to play around with the settings of this one. So let's remove our gradient texture, just delete it. We're going to add a wave texture. We're going to set it to Z. Plug it in. And now we're going to go to our texture coordinate, and instead of the UV for this one, we're going to use the object mode. The scale is off, so let's rescale this. Something like 0.5 seems to do the trick. And then we're also going to rescale our color ramp. And as you can see, the distortions we've created are not working for this because it's not distorting the Z-axis. So to fix this, we're going to add the Z into our add and just connect the X value. And one of the things that we need to do is we need to change our wave textures so that they distort the X value. So go to both of them and set them to X. I think next up we're going to delete the driver of the X value. So just right click and just delete the driver. And we're going to make this go up. And there's two ways to do it. You can use the phase of your wave texture, or you can use the Z location. Both are fine. So we can just add hash frame divided by 2. Now it goes up. That seems to work fine. But there's a seam in our wave, and that's because we're using the UV. And so we're gonna use object on this one as well. And now I think we need to play around with the settings and the scales of the distortion. So we can just scale it down, just add less of it. That seems nice. And then also I want to punch a couple of holes into these electricity bolts. And to do this, we're going to add a voronoi texture as well. Plug it in with a mix RGB node. And we're just going to plug in the distance. And then play around with the setting. I think we can add a color ramp. This gives us more of a control over the cutoff. And then we can also play around with the scale as well. So this goes way too fast, and so we're going to set our driver to frame divided by 10. And this looks weird, also because our strobe is too fast, so let's divide this by 2. And that's better. Okay, it's not going in the direction I want, so we can invert this by just going to our frame divided by 10 and adding a negative, and now it should go up. And this is our 3D electricity effect. And now to top this off, we can add a point light. Put it in front of our Suzanne. We are going to add a driver. So let's select our power. Let's add hash 500 plus cosine, and then frame times pi. And we are going to multiply it by 500, and this should create a strobe light. And we can just place this underneath the monkey. Give it a blue color. And just take our sun. We're also going to make this a black background. By going to our world properties and set the color to black. And this gives us some mean monkey. Don't piss off the monkey. And that concludes our tutorial. I hope this has helped you start with some lightning effects. You can always download source files in the description below. Please like and subscribe, and I hope to see you next time.